everyone, it's Teresa and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be my last 2019 themed video of the year. And that is the books I was most disappointed with in 2019. Some of these are new releases, some of them are not. I would like, before we get started, to throw up a disclaimer. When I mean disappointed, I don't mean utterly hate. For the most part, there's one or two books in here that I really just did not like. Other times it was because there was something about the book, the writing, the characters, or whatever you have that I just did not like and was thus disappointing to me. If you happen to enjoy these books, that's amazing. I am very happy for you, and this is no way an attack on your character, your taste in books, or whatever other aspect that you may find insulting. This is, for me, were just not the books that I was expecting them to be. And so they are on this list. Don't think of it as I definitely loathe these books, though like I said, some of them do fit in that aspect. But more so, these books were not for me, and I was disappointed. So, let's get into it because I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 books. And this is going to be in no particular order. This is not rating from most to least disappointing. I literally just kind of threw a list together because I was like, what books were disappointing to me? And I scrolled through Goodreads and I was like, oh, those books I did not like. So, let's get on with the list. The first book on this list is Queens of Indus Lear by Tessa Gratton. This is an adult high fantasy novel / retelling of King Lear. I had really high expectations going into this book. I think I gave this a 3 or a 3.5 out of 5 stars. My biggest issue with it was that sometimes you got lost in the writing, and not in the best way possible. It didn't leave a lot of stuff for my imagination, but also I felt like it lacked in descriptions in some aspects. The characters also kind of bothered me. Sometimes they had issues where I just didn't understand their motivations very well, and maybe it's just because I enjoyed King Lear despite its very women against women thing. I was somehow expecting this to turn that aspect on its head and maybe have the sisters work together, but that was not the case, and I was annoyed at this very weird hatred of each other based on miscommunication and lack of knowledge. And I was also annoyed because I had read some reviews because I was struggling through this book, so I was like, I sometimes read reviews that are non-spoilery so I can see where things pick up, if I'm just the only one feeling it or whatever. Someone had said that there's a character here that is unconfirmed, aromantic, or asexual. There is a confirmed bisexual side character. My thing with the terms unconfirmed, and I can see where someone had seen that, I just don't like the aspect of not explicitly stating or leaving wording for things for certain things like sexuality and gender identity to be interpreted by the readers. I don't like seeing reviews saying that is unconfirmed, because then that implies that there should be more development that is left unsaid, and this is a standalone book. So there should have been more development on that character side, either explaining that they are in fact aromantic or asexual. Yeah, I had spoken a little bit more about this in my December wrap-up, but I feel like I hadn't quite articulated the words as well as I had hoped, primarily due to loopiness and a lack of notes. So now that my thoughts are a lot clearer, this is what I thought about this book and why it was particularly disappointing to me. Like I said though, I did enjoy it. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. So there are aspects of that where I did enjoy it, but overall, there were some themes in here that I was just not a fan of, and some of the wording that, like I said, felt like it could have been misconstrued or interpreted in a various of ways by different readers, which, as you guys have seen, has been the case. The next book is Dead Girls and Essays on Surviving an American Obsession by Alice Boland. This is supposed to be an essay collection following this obsession with dead women, primarily in true crime, all that stuff. We tend to turn that woman into a commodity. Her death has become this highly popularized thing that we know, but we literally have no idea who this person is outside of this death or the potential events leading up to the death. You know? Does that make sense? But I also enjoyed this book. I gave a 3 out of 5 stars. I definitely did not hate it. I think what made this book the most disappointing to me was that it was mismarketed. A lot of the essays in this collection were about Alice Boland and her life, and her trying to kind of work her way through this life, through her moving to LA in this new world. There was really only one or two essays that really provided that dead girls aspect, and that was where I was most disappointed with. However, like I said, I think Alice Bolin is a great writer, and I will continue to pick up more of her works, but I don't think this particular one was for me, especially since it was not on the topic that I had assumed it was going to be on. The next two books should come as no surprise, and one of them is After by Anna Todd. I read After, and then After We Collided, and then, if you guys don't know, I also binged books 2 and 3 on Wattpad. Really, I'm probably going to only pick up book 4 because I want to see how the series ended. But essentially, this is about Tessa Young, who goes to her freshman year in college. She is like, the reins from that her mother has held her in she has been freed from them, and she can kind of traverse through this world. She has basically the perfect life, a very amazing grades, has a love for literature, has a great cookie-cutter boyfriend, and then she meets Tattooed Harden, and we have all seen the trailers probably to this show. I had a lot of high hopes about this book, thinking that it would give me some kind of, not that there would be more depth to the characters. I was disappointed primarily with this book and then the second book, because it just was verbatim the fan fiction just changing names and like maybe adjusting where the book ends. Which I think, as someone who loves reading and loves the publishing industry in terms of the editors and how much work and trust has to go into an editor for that book to become the book, like your favorite book of all time, to have that just be verbatim what it is and no actual development from the characters was kind of a slap in the face. Because now you can clearly tell that it was only published because of the love for money and because they could turn this into a movie and make it super popular, and were riding on the coattails of the One Direction success. It's just not my cup of tea. Like I said, it really did feel like a bit of a slap to the editing industry as a whole, because people who want to be writers, who want to be published authors, go through this work of like editing their own book and figuring out what works, what doesn't work, then having to find an agent and then finding an editor that sees their vision in the book, and like sometimes those relationships don't work, but the amount of time and effort it gets to even just the editor stage, and then getting from that stage to like a novel that you and your editor are happy with, and like the amount of work that goes into that to get it published. I feel like publishing the series as an attempt to make more money and turn it into a movie was really not that great. It was just really disappointing. I was expecting some changes to happen from the fan fiction to the now published work, but in reality I feel like if they wanted to make a movie out of a fan fiction, they should have just made it from a fan fiction. They didn't have to go ahead and try to give it some merit by publishing it into a novel and then turning it into a movie. Because like I said, it just feels like a slap in the face for like that aspect and the amount of love and hard work that goes into building a novel. Not saying that fan fiction does not have its merits. There are some fan fiction out there that literally trumps the original work that they're based off of. However, if that work were to become a published work, I would expect it to be at the same level of like working care and editing and everything in between that a traditionally published book / original work that was not based off of a fan fiction would have been. Disappointed. Will I finish out the series? I will probably borrow the 4th book just to get it done and over with. The next book is 50 Shades of Grey by E.L. James. I read this because my friend had read the 1st book and gave it a very lengthy, ranty review. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to San Francisco. I need light books to read. I need something funny. And I read it, and I don't remember what I gave this, but it's essentially a fan fiction of Twilight that got published, and it involves BDSM aspects. Now, to say this is a fan fiction of Twilight, I feel like would be an insult to Twilight. Because while I read it and I did laugh at it, there's just a lot of toxicity in this novel. And lots of kind of idolization and like the bad boy trope that we see in a lot of like this early kind of area of literature, especially like young adult, new adult, and all like that stuff, that I was just not a fan of. And like, I get it, Edward himself is a pretty toxic person, and it's not that great. However, Edward also wasn't a shitty human being. He was dependent and kind of really abusive, but he, to some degree, from my memory, appreciated some of Bella's boundaries. Christian Grey, none of those. So, very disappointed. that this book ever got published. So the next book that I did not like, and don't come for me, but that is Again But Better by Christine Riccio. Now, I didn't dislike this book. I enjoyed it. I gave it a 3.75 out of 5 stars. This is essentially, Shane has been struggling with her life for a bit. She wants to be a writer, but she's going through pre-med, perfect cookie cutter life that a girl should go for. And then she decides to take the leap and go take a creative writing class while studying abroad. There she meets Pilot and things ensue. This takes place in 2011. And while I love the trashiness of 2012, 2011 books, that aspect should remain in 2011 and 2012. I think that the cheating portion was, I don't like cheating in the slightest, not even if it makes sense or if it works. I don't like it. Just freaking communicate, and I don't like that the cheating trope keeps coming back and being like, not really, I don't like cheating. This had that. The voice of the character was very much like Christine, which I don't mind because sometimes you do, as an author, put pieces of yourself into main characters. I have certainly done that with my work in progress, but it read like an overly quirky 2012-2011 girl. Not saying that that is Christine's personality, but how it was written was very Christine, with like the big gestures and everything, and like sometimes, especially since given the time period it was in, we got a girl who was very clumsy and very quirky and cute, and it just read wrong to me. I struggled to really enjoy Shane as a character, plus the cheating. Then there was the magical realism aspect, which both saved this book, in my opinion, and also dinged it, because we didn't see the magical realism until halfway through. We saw hints of it, but the hints were not big enough for us to really get hints that there is going to be this magical realism aspect within this novel. So I will pick up whatever Christine has to put out next. I think she is a fabulous writer and has a lot of room and potential to grow. Like, this is a strong debut, but in terms of this book being a book that I can go back to and reread and potentially enjoy repeatedly, not on that list, not very high on that list. It's just the cheating was just the thing that I got, and then the writing style, I feel like it read a lot like 2012 fan fiction, where we have a very quirky and underappreciated girl who wants to try something different and then falls in love with a boy, but she's super clumsy, and like it's a surprise when someone like stares at her differently. Like, I would have preferred it if she had written it in 2012. Like, the setting can stay the same, but in terms of the characterization of Shane, I feel like if she had gotten rid of like that like clumsy element and that like some of the quirks, it would have made Shane's character a bit more, it's not likable, because Shane's a pretty cute character, a bit more easier to get into the mind to, because I was reading it and I was like sitting here like, I feel like I have seen this kind of style of writing in fan fiction. Not to say that's a bad thing, but like in terms of like the year that the fan fiction was written. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? The next book was actually a novella, and that is The Lost Sisters by Holly Black. This takes place between the Wicked King and the Cruel Prince. I gave this 2.5. It's supposed to be like Taryn's apology letter to her sister, but it was just a justification letter as to why she did the thing she did, and she's like, I'm sorry that it happened, but I would do it again. And I'm like, okay, well, fuck you too. Glad to see that the sister that you've suffered with and like holds some, like cares about you really don't care about. I have no care for her character, so this book made me hate her even more. The next book on my disappointing list was Splintered by A.G. Howard. This is an Alice in Wonderland retelling. It's supposed to be super dark. I was really intrigued by the concept. I liked it. I had been meaning to pick it up, but I just did not like the love interests. I didn't like the main character. The world was great, and one of the other love interests was a really compelling character, but in terms of like the other one, who was like really possessive and kind of nasty, even though he was like dating some other girl, I did not enjoy. Had high hopes, did not enjoy it. I think it's a good book, but I just feel like it's one of those young adult, early 2000s kind of novel that did not age well and has not aged well. The next book I actually DNF'd and I actually gave away because I didn't like it, and that is Myths and Legends. These are mythologies from around the world, edited by Jake Jackson. I had high hopes for this book, as I did with all these other books, because I only really know like Western civilization mythologies, in terms of like the Greek and Roman pantheons, some European mythology. I don't know much about like Native American mythology, African mythology, Central or Southern American mythology, Eastern mythologies. So I picked this book up thinking like, oh my goodness, this is going to be great. It's going to be a nice starter. No. I got a good chunk of the way into this book. There were a lot of like formatting errors that I was like, who didn't catch this? And while that didn't really bother me, it was like one of those things where I was like, okay, no big deal. I had gotten to the Greek myths portion. If you guys don't know or are new to my channel, I love Greek mythology. I have obscure random facts about Greek mythology that probably does not need to take up space in my brain, but it is there. And for some reason, there are a lot of mythologies here that, like, because of Christianity, have been heterosexualized, turned heterosexual, because it's easier to digest. For some odd reason, thanks Christianity, love you too. And I know them as, I know what they are originally written under. Like, I don't have the original text, clearly, but I do know from everyone else's kind of writings and like their translations that these characters are supposed to be homosexual, or like have that implication in there. And like I got to the Greek mythology part, and it was like everything that was gay was suddenly straight again. And I got very frustrated because up until then I had read Chinese mythology, Native American mythology, and then African mythology, and then Celtic mythology. And then I get to Greek mythology, which I am very well versed in, or for the most part I'm fairly well versed in, and see that there were some inconsistencies. And like I said, I'm not a fan of like heteronormalizing, making things straight when it is otherwise. And then like literally this book was published I think in 2018, 2019, so it's not unheard of that these texts and their original like translations have become more accurate. So then it gave me a lot of questions as to like the merit of the other works, the other myths that I had read, and like what was the original myth, what was this guy's version of the myth, and like it gave me a lot of disbelief for the remainder of the myths following the Greek mythology portion. So I DNF'd it because I was like, you know what? It's 2018, 2019, whenever this book was published. You have access to so many different translations and so many different versions of the text that are truer to how the original Greeks had said it, and you made it how Christianity wanted it. And that had me wondering about everything else, especially since prior to the Greek mythology portion, the majority of the novels written, the mythology here, were POCs. So I was like, how much of this was the translations of a white man? And it made me very uncomfortable, and I definitely did not enjoy, because I just, 2019, I want to see more accurate depictions of mythology from other people. You have the resources, you have the text, you have updated articles and works. There is literally barely any excuse for you to sit down and like tell me that Hyacinthus and Apollo were straight and that they were besties. And then that has me questioning the validity of like whether or not the African myths that you just told me are accurate, or if you had somehow whitewashed that. Or the Chinese. Sorry, not really. The next book is actually a poetry book, and that is Fierce Fairy Tales, Poems and Stories to Stir Your Soul by Nikita Gill. Now, I had read Wild Embers by Nikita Gill. I really enjoyed it. As you guys know me, for those of you who are new or know them on my channel, I don't read a lot of poetry. I am very finicky about poetry, and I think that's because I have some slight anger toward the poetry because of like my literature classes. Whoops. I read this because I really loved Wild Embers, and I really wanted to see where she had gone with this. There are some prose in here. Lots of prose. There's like longer poems as well, and I was really excited. I just could not connect to any of these poems. I think that they are really good poems and they have important messages, but I could not connect to it. And I think there was one poem that I was just like, what the fuck is this? Where she had rewritten or reimagined the concept of Cinderella's stepmother, and had given us basically how I had interpreted the poem was that it was Cinderella's stepmother giving us all the reasons as to why she became Cinderella's stepmother, like all the trauma she had gone through and like all the things that had been done to her. So she, in her anger and her frustrations, took it out on Cinderella. And it felt like it was justifying the stepmother's point of view and saying that I was hurt, so I hurt you. And while that is a huge problem, and like I think I would like to read more about that concept and more of that like point of view, it felt like we were getting a justification. It was written in a way that made me feel like at the end of it I was supposed to be like, oh, that makes sense, I feel bad, you know? Like, I get it, like as someone who has gone through a fair bit of trauma in her life, your trauma makes you do really shitty things sometimes. But at the end of the day, it is up to you to really find a way to own up to it. And I felt like that poem, which really gets on my nerves, had somehow justified being like, I was traumatized, so I'm gonna hurt people because I was traumatized, and that was kind of the end of it. Like, we were supposed to feel sympathy for her and almost like forgive her for that, and I was just like, nope, I can't. So, I'm sure I'll pick up the goddess one, but in terms of like this one, I could not connect to it, and that one poem / short story or whatever it's supposed to be, or poem and verse, just had me sitting there like, what? Because it was a really frustrating thing to read, because it was like this list of like all the trauma she'd gone through, and like she wanted to teach Cinderella the same thing, so she traumatized Cinderella, and I was like, I get it, I get that perspective, because that is a thing that does happen, but I felt like I was supposed to feel bad for Lady Tremaine. And then not only sympathize with her, which I get again, but also kind of say, okay, that's the reason and fixes why you traumatized Cinderella and like basically abused her. I don't know, maybe I read the poem wrong, but I was also talking about it with my friend who read the poem before me, and she agreed, so I don't know. And the last book in this disappointing list is another book that I have read recently, and if you guys follow my channel, then you will know it is Shadow and Bone by Leigh Bardugo. This is the first book in the Grishaverse trilogy. I didn't like it for a number of reasons. I think that the world building is really good, and that's what keeps me going. She writes a very mysterious and very atmospheric world. I don't know a lot about Russian mythology, surprisingly enough, and to hear about this Russian-based novel was very interesting to see. I think the Darkling, as the president of the We Stand the Darkling Club over here, is the most compelling character out of this book. He has a lot of different layers to him and a lot of different things that we could uncover as the series continues. But my problem was with the main character and the main love interest. I feel like their relationships really they are only characterized by their relationships. They are defined by each other. When one is gone, the other one is pining. And the timeline makes no sense to me because I am currently on the second book, and it feels like they should have gotten together before this book, but it didn't happen, and there's just not a lot of development from there. It kind of messed with my reading experience because it was frustrating to see this very 2011, 2012 kind of character go through this life of being clumsy and not beautiful enough and not being seen, and then go through this transformation of being beautiful and being seen, and that's when the love interest finally sees her. And it was weird to read about how really they're only defined by this relationship, and they don't grow unless they are in this relationship together. Some of the wording was also weird too, because I read a bit that was like, I nodded mutely, and I was like, okay, makes sense, but you don't really need to talk when you nod, and unless you are wearing bells or some kind of headgear that makes noise, you won't be making any sounds when you nod. But yeah, that is why I was disappointed in this book, especially since it's such a hype book and everyone really loves this series. I'm just like, I get it, the world is great, but I'm also like, where is the development here? Where? But that is it for my disappointed reads of 2019. Like I said in the beginning, if you like these books, if you love these books, that's really great for you. I am very happy for you. I mean that quite genuinely. I know I definitely like books that other people hate, but it is not an attack on you or your person or your likes and dislikes and your taste in books in any way, shape, or form. We are different people. I like what I like, you like what you like, and we can both agree that that you can know someone that likes and dislikes the same thing that you do. I like doing kind of not negative reviews, but explaining why I dislike a book. I think that we have kind of especially in the book world, we have cultivated this issue of like, if you don't like the same book as I do, then you're like the worst person on the world ever. So it's nice to talk about books that I wasn't a huge fan of or like was disappointed in, and give my viewpoint, and like maybe someone else who has disliked these books can also relate, or maybe someone who wants to know why someone might have disliked their favorite book can have a different viewpoint and be like, okay, yeah, I get it. Because I'm always in that boat of being like, yeah, I get why you dislike it. If you guys want to have that kind of discussion, or tell me about the kind of books that you were disappointed with in 2019, leave those down below. Other than that, I will leave every link, every review if possible, as well as if any of these books have trigger warnings, they will be in my reviews down below. Social media, hit like, subscribe, and I will talk to you guys in my next video. I hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful week, and I will see you guys next time with maybe a shorter video, but I don't know. Bye!